Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 84th episode of Retuning Your Firm. And it's Friday, the 27th of January, 2023. It's going to be a fun session today. We're looking at something that happened rather a long time ago called the crash. Some of you will remember it, but there were people who were leading professional services firms at that time, obviously, and two pioneers from that period are both with us today. So I would like to welcome, this is me saying hello, first of all, Richard Chaplin, and then I would like to welcome Neville Eisenberg. Welcome, Neville. And I'm also very happy today that we have Tim Aspinall, who's also going to be talking to us. So back to me for a minute. So before we get into the show proper, I'd just like to remind you exactly what it's all about. And this is the word, you may have seen the words. So the UK is predicted to be in economic recession for much of 2023. So what we're trying to do in episode 84 of the show is to bring together two pioneers who were leading their firms before, during, and after the financial crash of 2008. And I've asked them to share some tips based on first-hand experience of shifting, as I put it, from good to bad and back. Before we get into that, I would just like to quickly say that there are a few forum news before I hand over to Francesca, that hundreds are watching the videos from the past shows, so do watch those out. And there's a new search engine under development to make it even easier to find a great video. The launch reception for the awards took place, and that award video is now available. Submissions are due at the end of February with the ceremony in June. And don't forget to make a submission. Our winter 22 sector trends tracker has been circulated. 95 firms of all sizes joined the research panel, and it's a really interesting set of findings that we have, which hopefully we'll be able to give quite a lot of prominence in future weeks. And Mentor Match, I've mentioned, lots of active mentorships there, so do bear that one in mind. So I think that's probably about enough from me. So what I'm going to do now is hand you over to Francesca, and welcome, Francesca, and over to you to introduce our first guest.
Thank you so much, Richard. Pleasure to be with you all. I'm Francesca Lagerberg of Baker Tilly International. And as Richard set it up, we've got two fantastic panelists today. And I think this reminds me of the Winston Churchill quote that those that fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. So this is a good opportunity for us to look at those who've been through the good, the bad, and back again, as there's so much that you can see from the past that really helps inform us for this year and years to come. So first up, we've got Neville Eisenberg, who was senior partner at BLP during a stint that took him through the crash and back, and also is a very, very strong member of the Managing Partner Forum as well. So Neville, no further ado, over to you.
Thanks very much, Francesca. Richard, thank you for inviting me. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. I'm going to kick off really with a few general points and then end my short remarks really just with a few examples of things we did at BLP last time round. So the first point I wanted to make is really about strategy and the importance of having a really clear strategy in place with clear long-term goals and, of course, plans for achieving those goals over the short and medium term. The strategy needs to be both resilient and flexible to accommodate changes in the external environment. But I think it's really important to have that in place in order to keep the firm moving forward, even in difficult times. Sounds obvious, but I'm constantly amazed by the firms I come across that don't really have clear strategies in place. Second point relates to good housekeeping. One needs to, of course, at all times, but particularly during challenging times, ensure that there are clear and detailed programs in place to optimize financial performance, to keep close to clients, and to, of course, look after one's own people. Again, I come across firms with astonishingly high levels of lockup, weak client relationship management, and often failures to address low morale or anxiety amongst one's people within the firm. Third general point I wanted to make relates to leadership and the importance of the firm's leadership leading from the front, always projecting confidence and enthusiasm about the business. I'll never forget an experience I had when coming back from a meeting in our client's suite. I got back to my desk and my secretary came rushing into my room and she said, "Neville, you were coming up in the lift and there were some other people there and you didn't smile at them." And they called me up, someone called me up and said to ask if something's wrong. And I was just thinking about the meeting I'd just been through, quite an intense meeting. And I wasn't at all conscious of not being friendly or smiling or anything like that. But it is something that people notice, and one really has to remember to always project that sense of confidence. I guess the fourth point I wanted to mention relates to tough decisions. During difficult times, one needs to look at the cost base of the firm, sometimes engage in cost-cutting programs. And my advice there would be to always go deeper than everyone immediately feels comfortable with, because the worst thing to have to do is to come back for a second time and do it again. I would also urge those difficult decisions to be taken as quickly as possible and with the highest degree of transparency possible within the firm, because I think it's quite empowering for everyone in the firm if they feel they know the decisions that are being taken and they understand why they're being taken. So moving on to the last area that I wanted to quickly speak about, which relates to opportunities in a downturn, and using BLP, my former firm, as a bit of a case study. At the time of the global financial crisis in 2007-8, we were really in high growth mode. We were actively hiring laterals in the market. We were expanding internationally. And we were faced with a really big choice. Do we hunker down? And our sense was that most of our peers were hunkering down for this difficult period ahead. Or did we decide to double down on our investment and growth? And recognizing the risks involved, we took the decision to double down, and we really expanded our growth program, taking advantage of some of the fallout from the elite firms in the years that followed the GFC. And this led to a period of really unprecedented growth for BLP at a time when average growth rates in the market were pretty flat. The second point I wanted to mention was that in 2007, we set up Lawyers on Demand, initially just to provide a pool of lawyers for secondments to our clients. But of course, this new business, which was completely different from our traditional business, then grew very strongly during the recession years. And perhaps that's a topic we can return to in the discussion section. I can expand a little bit on that initiative. So I guess in conclusion, my overall message is that downturns in activity in the economy present opportunities to optimize existing operations, but also identify exciting new growth opportunities, which can set one up very strongly for the inevitable upturn. Thank you.
Thank you, Neville. A great sort of series of examples and a helpful case study. And we'll come back to some questions after we have a chance to hear from Tim Aspinall, who was former managing partner of D&H Stallard and now is non-executive and involved in such organisations as the English National Opera. Tim, tell us about your experience.
Thanks, Francesca. Well, I thought I'd just tell you a bit about what life was like during the recession for me and my firm, because those narratives I always think are helpful to people who haven't lived through a recession. So I just want to go back to before 2008 when the recession started and just remind everybody what life was like then. We had a booming economy. There hadn't been a recession since 1991. So we'd had a fantastic period of growth. The deals were everywhere, high multiples, credit was easy, property market was hot. All lawyers were making a lot of money. It was an amazing time and a bit like the last few years, really, isn't it? But despite what politicians said that the time of boom and bust had ended, they really thought that. The recession came in mid-2008 when GDP contracted by about 0.7%. That was the formal start of the recession. But things really started to look bad when in Q3 of 2008, Lehman Brothers went broke. NatWest were bailed out by the government. Merrill Lynch was saved from bankruptcy by the Bank of America. And looking back, I think that was the time when we realized we had to do something. So we took action straight away to reduce costs in the business by removing what costs we could from normal day-to-day expenditure, but also taking out salary costs by not hiring new people and losing poor performers. And I think looking back, that early action was really important as we saw the problems ahead. Weirdly, though, nothing seemed to change in our business. And our law firm, like many others, carried on as normal, even as unemployment started to rise. And in fact, our year end was 30th of June, and 30th of June 2009 turned out to be a brilliant year with strong revenues and lower salary costs. So that the recession didn't impact us and most other firms immediately. It was only really later in 2009 that the real world economic impact started to hit. Unemployment was rising then. And we started to see clients, companies go broke, particularly in the retail and property sectors. And that's when we started to feel the impact. Clients wanted reductions in fee rates. They wanted wholly contingent transaction fees on deals. And so negotiating fees and managing assignments effectively within those fee limits became absolutely critical. And we did learn how to do that. I think that was the beginning of that sort of learning experience about pricing that everybody talks about now. But we didn't do it as well as we should have done. That came much later. The other thing that happened was that we froze salaries. I can't remember now whether we actually cut them for a time, but we certainly froze them. And that was with the consent of staff. And the idea was to preserve as many jobs as we could. And that was a pact that many companies actually agreed with their workforce. And it meant later we were in a better position when the recession ended to start up again. But there were redundancies, and we did defer training contracts as well. Now, looking back, I can see from the data that the recession technically ended in mid-2009, but trust me, it didn't feel like that. And the data being published at the time said GDP carried on falling throughout 2009, but actually when it was revised, they said it had stopped falling by the end of June. I'd say we actually felt the impact of the recession for a few years after it technically ended. And many of our property clients had gone broke, and people were just less willing to spend money. I mean, like most law firms, we had a balanced business. So some of the shortfall in property was made up by litigation, which boomed, and employment did well. And a lot of corporate lawyers, of course, became restructuring lawyers for a few years. But overall, revenues and profits fell. I think that one thing that helped us a lot was that culture was really strong in the firm. Partners and staff liked the firm, they supported it, they wanted it to succeed, and they wanted to stay. So despite all the problems, people kept with us. And that loyalty was repaid because we kept with them after the recession ended and tried to make up the losses that people had suffered in their pay and so on. I think I remember the words of Mervyn King, who said, "All recessions end and this one will too." And we kept reminding everybody of that and kept a constant eye on the future. And the one other thing we did was look at our client base during that time, and we decided to move up the value chain and target bigger companies who were keen to reduce their legal spend. And that was a really important moment for us and resulted in long-term benefits. So the recession ended, QE meant loads of money back in the economy, and we've had boom time since then. And what we're going to see now is a natural correction, and perhaps we'll talk about that in the panel session.
Fantastic, Tim. Thank you so much. And it's really fascinating to hear your own personal story of how that happened. We're now going to just share some questions and get some additional insight from you both. And last time I didn't give Richard much time to talk, so I'll make sure we give him plenty of time to ask questions as well today. But Neville, maybe I could just start with you. I think there's something fascinating about that decision you made about whether to hunker down or whether to go for growth. And obviously it paid off for you, and you got the success from that. But that must have been an incredibly difficult decision to make. And I'm sure plenty of people thought you were making the wrong decision at the time. With people thinking about the same thing at the moment, what advice would you give to them about what decision they should be making today?
I think a lot of it depends on the longer term strategy that's in place, and also the opportunities which face particular firms, and also the sort of general health of the firm, if you like. If the firm is in a fairly strong place and people are highly motivated and there's a very clear strategy of things that you want to achieve, and you're in the middle of executing on that strategy, to put everything on pause for and of course, at the beginning of a downturn, one doesn't quite know how long it's going to last. And as Tim mentioned, and I completely agree with his comments, that the difficult period continued until well after the recession technically ended. I mean, we had a fantastic run in our firm throughout the recession years, the technical recession period. It eventually caught up with us, I think, in 2011, where we had a bit of a tough year, but then we bounced back very quickly. But so we did, eventually it did catch up with us a bit, and we had a tough year in terms of revenue and profits. But I think my main advice for anyone thinking about whether they should continue their growth programs or just put things on pause is to think very hard about sort of where are they at in executing their strategy, and how critical is it really to the future of the firm? How resilient is the firm generally? And if they're feeling confident, I would recommend trying to take advantage of the opportunities that come up in the downturn and continue the investment program. Of course, one doesn't have to continue at quite the pace as one might have been doing during the good years, but I think to put everything on hold and interrupt the development of a firm which is on a strong track seems to me like a real shame, and should be avoided wherever possible.
Yeah, and I know many accounting firms, as opposed to law firms, did that during the recession. They put whole training contracts on pause and lost a generation who just never proceeded with them. And, Tim, lots of just fantastic things I'd love to ask you about, but perhaps I could pick up on the getting rid of people, the redundancy piece, the reducing numbers, which had lots of headlines from the tech companies recently, but is always a fantastically difficult decision. What did you use as your guiding star about who you kept, how you kept your workforce good enough to keep you moving forward, but managing that very difficult decision of numbers?
Well, it's always difficult to get rid of people, I think, as managing partner of a firm or chief executive of any organisation. It's the hardest thing you do, because the firm's like a family, really, and you want to support everybody. But I always kept an eye on, the firm's success. The firm had to survive, otherwise everybody would lose their job. So we had to take people out where we thought there was going to be less demand. And we always focused on people who we regarded as the poorer performers, because we wanted to keep the very best people. I mean, I think the idea of, which wasn't just our idea, it was common amongst many other firms, of freezing salaries and even cutting them. And I can't remember whether we cut them or not, but that was a pact that was agreed with staff so that everybody could keep the job, because nobody wanted to be made redundant at that time. I mean, unemployment was, I think in 2009, it was about 2.5 million. And that worked really well. And in a way, that loyalty that it created between us and the people who suffered with us kept the firm together, and all those people stayed. And as I say, we did reward them later with bonuses and pay. And so it was a kind of, we're all in it together attitude, really. But yeah, some people did lose their jobs. And going back to that lost generation point, I think there was a lost generation of property lawyers in the whole profession, because people's contracts were deferred, training contracts were deferred, and a lot of property lawyers were let go because property was the area that I think was most affected during the recession. Property companies were just not able to get credit from banks who were themselves short of money, and that gap in property lawyers lasted for quite a long time, and resulted in inflationary salary inflation really in the property sector for a while after the recession.
Yeah, and I really remember that trend, and I also remember that trend of where people did really come together and collegiately go to reduced hours. Richard, over to you.
Oh, thanks very much, Francesca, and as always, your brilliant questions. I was quite interested just to really explore a little bit more around leadership with, particularly with Neville, and because one of your comments about not smiling in the lift, if I recall, you said, but which could be seen as trivial, but actually really does send important signals. So what other sort of ways do you think a leader can project enthusiasm without appearing to be living on a different planet from everybody else?
Gosh, you know, I think I think probably the one thing one cannot do enough of is be visible. And of course, when things get tough, suddenly one's diary fills up to, you know, if it were possible to squeeze more meetings into the day of a managing partner's diary, that happens during difficult times because everyone wants to talk to the managing partner. And there are lots of meetings lots of extra meetings sort of squeeze into one's diary. So it becomes much, much more challenging to be generally visible to the staff and the partners and the lawyers and in a law firm, but professionals generally in firms. And yet there's never a time when it's more important to be visible. So I found myself having to sort of book time in my diary just to be free to wander around, chat to people, you know, a friendly word here, a word of encouragement there, and make sure to organize opportunities to meet up with groups of people from right across the firm, not limit oneself to having meetings with partners who are concerned about their practice areas, concerned about potential redundancies, concerned about clients that seem to be struggling and not delivering the usual workflows. Partners can suck up a huge amount of one's time. So one has to really make sure that you build into your schedule opportunities to be visible amongst the staff generally, and just show some empathy, provide some support, and above all, just demonstrate to people that one is there for them, because I think people really do need that sense of encouragement and a sense that they're valued at a time when anxiety levels are a little bit higher. So I guess that, you know, I know I made that point at the beginning, but I can't think of anything leaders need to do which is more important than that. One other very quick point I would make is that during difficult times, there is a temptation, I think, to become diverted from one's strategic objective and business plans to quite a high degree, with a whole range of sort of tactical things. And again, I think the leader's job, one of the important aspects of a leader's job is to try and ensure that the firm remains on its path. It might be at a slightly slower pace. It might be with a few twists and turns here and there. But really, one is the guardian of the execution of the strategy, and one needs to make sure that that program more or less continues so that the firm continues to progress in the way one has planned.
Thanks, Neville. That was inspiring. Tim, just if I can ask one question, I'll hand you back to Francesca. I mean, we always say in life that we learn lessons from the experiences that we undergo. How do you think managing your firm through the recession has changed you?
That's a very profound question for this time of the morning, Richard. Well, I think that when you manage a firm through a recession, you become, you know, you have to make difficult decisions, and you become quite resilient, I think, because you have to withstand a lot of people saying we should do things differently, or they don't like that decision. I mean, everything appears easy, I think, if you've lived through a very bad recession like the Great Recession. Nothing is as bad as that, and nothing will be as bad as that, hopefully, in the next few generations. I mean, I do think that the recession that we're going to see now is going to be very different from the one that we experienced in 2008-9. I mean, it's going to be a lot shorter and a lot shallower. But I think that the bigger challenge, in a way, is high inflation, rising interest rates, and quantitative tightening. Because what happened after the last recession was governments around the world just pumped money into the economy, and that all that money led to asset prices increasing. It led to loads of money available for deals, which meant high multiples, and all that was fantastic for lawyers, and we all made lots of money. But you have to wonder, with high inflation, rising interest rates, and quantitative tightening, whether that market will come back in the way that it did after the last recession, because the governments can't afford to pump that level of money into the economy anymore, and the economy's got to survive in a different way. And so I think the recession isn't the problem. The recession is the beginning of a different period of economic activity, I suspect. Law firms are resilient, so I expect them to survive and do well, as they always do.
Thank you, Tim. Over to you, Francesca, for a couple of minutes. A couple of questions, I'm sure.
Yes, we've got a couple of minutes left, and one of the questions we've had from someone who's attending live is it counterintuitive to put prices up during a recession? And I know that's an issue that plays on the mind of many people, is how do you do that balance? And maybe that's a question for both of you. How did you manage that constant problem of how do you make sure you're getting the right value for the work you're doing, whilst managing with that empathy the situation of your clients? Maybe Neville, you'd like to go first.
Well, pricing really is always a complex topic, and for my part, I was always less interested in what the rack rates were, and far more interested in whether clients felt they were getting value for money in overall terms. And I think it is possible to put one's prices up during a recession. I wouldn't make too much of a song and dance about it, because I suspect clients would feel that one isn't living in the real world if you're sort of pumping up prices when everyone else is struggling with their cost base. But I think the far more important point is to make sure that partners are out there talking to clients, demonstrating an understanding of the challenges that they're going through, making sure that they're available to support clients, sometimes in informal ways and without charging fees during tricky times. And I think if those relationships are strong, then the rate per hour is far less important than whether the client feels they have a firm they can rely on to help them through thick and thin, and that they're getting value for money. And I think that's what one really needs to focus on during difficult times.
Fantastic.
Well,
and
I think we're going to run. We're out of time, I'm afraid,
aren't we?
Francesca.
Again,
Oh, we are. I said when you're enjoying yourself, things go far too quickly. But I'd like to thank Neville, and I think your list of strategy, housekeeping, leadership, tough decisions, and looking for the opportunities. But then, most importantly, are you going to double down with that investment, or are you going to start all over in a different direction? I think those are really, really important. And I think, Tim, I really like the way that you were saying, just don't forget that actually you might have a really good first year. I mean, law firms, accounting firms did brilliantly in 2022 during the recession, during the pandemic. But actually, the recession is when your clients then start feeling it in the real world, and then that trickles through back to you. So, and reminding us that maybe government doesn't have the money to throw at it, which they did back in 2010-11. So thank you all very much. We're back in a couple of weeks. Next time we're looking at financial management and how to keep your banker happy. So there's another topic to think about in 2 weeks' time. So thank you, panel, and great session as always. Thank you, Francesca, for your inspiring questions, and look forward to seeing you as an audience in a couple of weeks' time. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.